Hello everyone. In this demonstration, we would be covering how Agilepoint process can consume a Biztalk application. Previously, Agilepoint's Biztalk integration was in form of native Biztalk calls where there was a stencil with shapes available for one-way and two-way synchronization. However, with Biztalk now exposing its application as a WCF service, so things have become a lot more easier. In order to demonstrate the new methodology, I would be using a purchase request system as a demo, where this purchase request, after it goes through a couple of steps of approval in Agilepoint, it would be submitted to Biztalk for processing, where Biztalk would be sending it for invoice processing to different vendors. And once the invoice is received along with the purchase order, those are uploaded back to SharePoint. I'll first switch to my Biztalk application. Before I do that, I'll show you the schemas which have been set up in the Solution Explorer. As you can see, there are a lot of schemas. One requirement which we have in order to use this new functionality is that on the schema node, the element form default property needs to be set to qualified. By default, it is set to default, but it needs to be turned to qualified. Next, we will switch to our main process, purchase order request orchestration, where an incoming purchase request from our Agilepoint side would be received by this Biztalk application. It then makes a call to a SQL Server database to look up vendors. Once it receives the list of vendors, it combines it with the request message being received from Agilepoint and create a message which has both the vendor and the purchase request information. Once that is done, based on the values being selected on the form, it would calculate the shipping and the tax rates, and then it decides which vendor to pay. The orchestration would decide which vendor this purchase request needs to be assigned to. And in order to just demonstrate how it would work with an ERP system, we have just created a dummy database in my SQL Server where it is inserting a purchase order request into the database, and then finally it sends it to the vendor service, which is in this case I've just created the dummy WCF service which is running in the background based on the vendor you have selected. It calls its WCF service for invoice processing. Once the vendor service receives the invoice, it would put that file into a file share, where this second orchestration, as soon as it drops that file in the file share, would be listening to that file share and receives the file, processes the file and turns it into an XML. The flat file is turned into an XML message, and it sends it for invoice processing. Once the invoice processing is done, the message is uploaded or the generated invoice and the purchase order is uploaded to SharePoint in form of an XML file, which is uploaded to a form library. Therefore, it can be opened in the InfoPath form. Once the Biztalk application has been configured, it can be published to the Biztalk server using the Visual Studio Deploy Solution option. I've already published it to Biztalk server, so I'll navigate to the application and I can see there is a Biztalk application available called Northwind Purchasing. I've already configured the send and the receive ports for this application. The most important port for in order to communicate with Agilepoint is the purchase request receive port, which I have configured as a net TCP port, which would be consumed as a WCF service. Once I have done this, I'll bring up the Biztalk WCF service publishing wizard in order to publish this as a WCF service. Click on next, select the metadata only endpoint, select my receiving port, click on next. In this case, I'll publish Biztalk orchestration as a WCF service, locate my Biztalk assembly, click on next. I'll select what receive port I want to use. Next. What is the target namespace? I'll go with the default namespace. And which directory I want to use for exposing it as a WCF service. So I can say purchasing process. Since I already have it, the override existing location option becomes available. I can say override and what kind of authentication scheme I want to use. Once I'm done setting up things on the Biztalk side, I'll switch to Agilepoint Envision, which is the process modeling environment, where I have created a very simple workflow where somebody would come in and submit a purchase request, and this would be the InfoPath form which would be made visible to him. So as you can see, he can fill up the info path request where he selects a supplier and what kind of shipping method he wants to use, which is later on it's going to be used by Biztalk to calculate the shipping rates, and also what kind of items he wanted to order. Once that is done, it goes to the next level approver, where next level approver would either approve or reject it. If he rejects it, the status of the info path request is changed to rejected. So I've used an update info path shape over here to set the value back to rejected. As you can see, I've changed the status column to rejected. Or if it is approved, then I send an approval notice and change the status back to accepted, approved in this case. Okay, next I need to pass this information on to Biztalk for Biztalk to start processing the whole request, and later on, once I receive the response back from Biztalk, I would archive the request. In this case, the service was set up as a one-way request, so I would get the response immediately back from Biztalk, but the Biztalk would continue doing its processing. One thing to remember about the Wcf shape is that it can handle both asynchronous and synchronous processing by setting this property to either true or false. Anyways, I'll show you the whole thing from scratch how this was configured. So I'll go to the Premiere extension stencil. I'll drag and drop a Wcf shape. I'll click on the Wcf configuration section. Click on configure. Over here, it would ask me first to select the service URL, which in this case is not with purchasing. I'll click on connect. It would automatically discover the bindings and the endpoints and the web method to use. Since I have only one of each kind of binding, endpoint, or web method in this case, there's only one value available. But if there were multiple endpoints available, then it would have exposed multiple endpoints and I could have selected which ones to choose. Once I have done that, I'll click on the request tag. It brings up the schema mapper, where on the left hand side what I'm seeing is my info path schema, and on the right hand side I'm seeing the Biztalk schema. So I can do a mapping between the two this way. I've already configured it, so I'll cancel this one and show you an already configured Biztalk shape. So as you can see, my request is all mapped, and even the repeating items are all mapped to repeating items within the Biztalk schema. And since I did not, it's a one-way service, the response schema node is disabled. Once I have completed this, I'll go ahead and publish it to Agilepoint server. As you can see, the current version running on my server is 1.08 and the new version would be 1.09. Click on OK. Once I have configured the call for Biztalk application, I'll go ahead and publish this process model to Agilepoint server. As you can see, the current version running on my server is 1.08 and the new version would be 1.09. Click on OK. Once this model has been published, I'll switch back to my SharePoint environment. As you can see, on my this is the SharePoint site I'm using for the purchase request demo, and there is a library called purchase request. If I go to the settings tab of this purchase request in the form library settings, workflow settings, I've associated it with the purchase request Biztalk approval process. You can see that I've set it up to start the workflow when a new item is created, and the workflow I'm using is purchase request Biztalk. This is my process model, as you can see. I'll click on submit. Go back to my site. As you can see on the site, I have got Agilepoint task list so that I can monitor all the tasks which are assigned for this process. I also have a view for the Northwind purchasing SQL database, the database where the Biztalk was creating rows. Also, there are views for purchase order and pending invoices infopath libraries. These are the libraries where infopath files would be uploaded from Biztalk site. Now, in order to demonstrate it, I'll be first running the vendor services in the background. By running this batch file, it started the WCF services, one of which is the Fabricam vendor and the other one is Litware. Now in order to initiate the process, I'll go to purchase request, click on new. Fabricam as the supplier, and today we'll fill in the data on this form method. I'll select Fabricam as the supplier and today air as my shipping method. I'll add a new row. I'll just put in some values. I'll add a new row. Make it a unique part number. Okay. Once I'm done filling up the data, I can click on submit. Make it a unique part number. Okay. Once I'm done filling up the data, I can click on submit. It's currently assigned to a person called manager. So I'll first log in as manager. As you can see, a new process has been initiated on the Agilepoint side. Log on to SharePoint as manager using this shortcut icon. And it's currently assigned to a person called manager. So I'll first log in as manager. Switch to purchasing. And as you can see now, log on to SharePoint as manager using this shortcut icon. Manager happens to be one of the dummy users which have been created on this demo VPC. I'll switch to purchasing. And as you can see now, I have one task waiting for me, and also under the purchase request view there is a new request with a status new right now. I'll go ahead and click on open. It would show me the view which has been configured for manager approval, and I can see now an accept and reject button. I'll go ahead and accept it. Let me switch back to the purchase. If I now switch back to my process viewer, I can see the process is moving forward. It's right now updating the status, and now it's calling the Biztalk service. Now let me switch back to the purchasing site. If I click on refresh at this point of time, keep an eye on the vendor service console and the Northwind purchasing SQL database. As the order gets processed, there would be. You can see the status field has been changed to approve, and also now the Biztalk model has been called. Application has been called, and keep an eye on the vendor service console and the Northwind purchasing SQL database. As the order gets processed, there would be new rows which would start appearing in those sections. It would take around 30-35 seconds for this to happen. As you can see, a new row started appearing over here in the SQL database, and also the new messages started appearing in the vendor service console. It said it received the purchase order named this, submitted the invoice to the vendor, and the invoice has been accepted. Now if I switch back to my purchase order info path library, I can see a new purchase order has been submitted over here from the Biztalk side, along with the tax and shipping and handling charges. Similarly, there would be one invoice which was created in the invoices library. It has all the information which was retrieved from Biztalk, on how Agilepoint can work with Biztalk for both one-way and two-way, along with the tax and shipping and handling charges. Similarly, there would be one invoice which was created in the invoices library. That concludes our demonstration on how Agilepoint can work with Biztalk for both one-way and two-way messaging. Thanks a lot.